Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Colored Conversations, a safe place where we talk about race. Today we have another special guest, Dr. Norwood from Howard University. But I'm going to go ahead and let Pastor Dr. Kinlock introduce her. But first and foremost, let's start off with a word of prayer. You pray with me. Father God, we just ask that you would have your way in this episode, Lord. Just be with us, guide us in Jesus' name. Amen. All right,
Amen.
Doc, would you like to introduce our special guest?
Absolutely. I'm very excited about the conversation we're about to have today, and the guest that we have with us is Dr. Carolette Norwood. She is a professor and department chair of the Department of Sociology and Criminology at Howard University. She specializes in the area of the intersectionality of Black women, and she's done much work in the area of women's studies. She is the author of New Directions in Black Feminist Sociology, The Politics of Space at the Intersection of Race, Class, and Gender. Now, Preacher, I'm excited to have Dr. Norwood with us today. You know, this is Black History Month. And for the entire month, I think the conversation may have been a little bit one-sided. It's just been the fellas talking for the last couple of weeks. And I think that we ought to save the best for last, and let's have a conversation on our wonderful Black women, the contributions that they've made in our society and our culture. And it's time to hear about their experiences. Dr. Norwood has done much work in the area of ethnography or ethnographic research and interviews of Black women. And so we want to pull some of that out. So today, Dr. Norwood, we say welcome to you. Thank you for joining us for this conversation this afternoon.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. The first thing I want to ask you, Dr. Norwood, again, I just alluded to, you did work in Ghana just with regard to women's empowerment, but you've also done a lot of ethnographic research talking to Black women of all different classes and experiences over the years. Talk to us about the intersectional identity of Black women.
Wow. So intersectionality is a concept that emerges from Black women's lived experience of being both Black and being female, and often invisible in both of those categories.
Mm-hmm.
So when people talk about the Black struggle, the focus is often on Black men. When people talk about the woman struggle, the focus is often on white women.
Mm-hmm.
Black women have played a prominent role, often a leading role, without the visibility of their leadership in both of those movements. And so intersectionality is really about giving visibility to persons who are often invisible.
Mm-hmm.
So recognizing that identities are not single or singular, that we often come in with multiple identities, and giving all of those identities some priority or some salience in our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Black, but I'm a woman, but I'm also a woman from South Louisiana, right? And so all of that impacts how I see and understand the world, right? And so that's what intersectionality is about. It's about, again, the visibilities of identities that would otherwise not be seen.
Absolutely.
Right?
Thank you. You said a key word there, invisibility. I remember in high school reading the book Invisible Man by Richard Wright, where he really talks about this dynamic of not being seen in the wider society as a Black man. But this is the current and the ongoing experience of Black women. Like you said, you might have some recognition of the Black man in some spaces, but there's an invisibility with Black women.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
What would you say have been the historical struggles and challenges faced by Black women?
You know what? The struggles that we face 100 years ago are the struggles we face today. And that's not something I think I knew until I started my work in Cincinnati. So this work started actually around HIV, specifically looking at high HIV prevalent neighborhoods. And funny enough, the newspaper article that caught my attention was a newspaper article about HIV in Black communities or Black neighborhoods, but it only focused on Black men.
Right.
And so my question was, where were Black women, right? And so, and while it is true that Black men, statistically, namely same-sex loving Black men, are more impacted by HIV infections, so are heterosexual Black women at far disproportionate rates.
Right.
So look at women who are infected with HIV, for example. In Cincinnati, more than 70% are Black and women of color or biracial women in that category. And that's a huge
Absolutely.
disparity. And so I didn't see me, I didn't see us, I didn't see women in that article. But in doing that work, I ended up going to the archives because I needed to make sense of the present. I needed to make sense of the here and now. And so that meant that I need to go back. And in going back, I found myself digging through old papers and discovering a history that I think for the most part has been lost. There are few historians that focus on Black experiences in Cincinnati. Dr. Nikki Taylor, who's in our history department at Howard, work focuses on the 19th century, the 1800s. But Black people from the progressive era to the present, there are few people. Taylor, Henry Louis Taylor, who is a historian at a New York university, has done some work called Race in a City. And then there is Beverly, I think, a bunch of Lyons, who did work, I think a book called Contested Grounds. Is that her name? I told you I'm going to forget names.
It's okay.
Maybe it's Contested Terrains. But it's a really good book. And it was years ago that I read it. But my point is that a lot of that history or the knowledge about Black people's lived experiences in that city has gone unnoticed and untalked about. And so in that process of digging in the archives, I uncovered this amazing story of activism in this dynamic Black community that too few of us know anything about. But I also uncovered that many of the health injustices that Black people face today were some of the same problems that they faced 100 years ago. So I just finished a paper on my experience of doing reproductive justice work in Cincinnati. And in the process, thanks to Donna Ain Davis, who wrote a book called Reproductive Injustice, she, in that book, mentioned something called the Shepherd-Towner Act. And I had never heard of it. And so because I'm researching Cincinnati and I'm looking at infant mortality rates, and I'm thinking, let me check and see if, there was any Shepherd-Towner Act in Cincinnati. But lo and behold, the state of Ohio did have a Shepherd-Towner grant in the 1920s. And the only place in the entire state where there was explicit focus on Black women took place in Cincinnati. And the reason why was because Cincinnati had one of the highest, in fact, it had the highest Black IMR in the nation in the 1920s. And today, Ohio has the second highest Black IMR in the nation. And Cincinnati metropolitan area still leads the nation in terms of the metropolitan spatial, area for Black IMR in Ohio. And so how is it 100 years later, even though the IMR has dropped significantly in terms of absolute number, right? So maybe in the 1920s, it was 185 per 1,000 births. And today, it may be 13 per 1,000 births. But guess what? The disparity then was 3 times the rate. The disparity today is 3 times the rate. How is that possible?
100 years later.
Yeah, exactly. 100 years later. And so many of the struggles we faced 100 years ago are some of the same struggles that we're facing now. And that can only be explained through, the systematic and institutionalized ways that racism, heterosexism is institutionalized in the U.S. And so when I say institutionalized, I mean the way that it is, the way it appears through policy, the way it structure our lives and our life chances and our life quality. And so since those dynamics didn't change, since we're still as racist and as homophobic and as sexist as we've ever been, maybe, you can point to, a few things that are slightly better.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, those systems are still in place. So the
Right.
outcomes are not much different for Black
Mm-hmm.
people.
Right.
And so for me, that was very eye-opening. Coming to terms with, and I'm born in the 70s, right? So I'm born in the period where, schools are now desegregating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Black people are able to move into white neighborhoods.
Right.
That did become Black again, but that's a
Mm-hmm.
whole other thing, right? But yeah, and so at a time where people thought we were making a great deal of progress, we are waking up, I think, due to some really amazing work by Michelle Alexander, for example, in the new Jim Crow,
Mm-hmm.
to understanding that Jim Crow didn't end in 1960.
That's right.
It just evolved into a less obvious, or less, what do you say,
More subtle.
Mm-hmm.
again?
I said more subtle.
More subtle. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
less conspicuous than it was, 40, 50 years ago.
Right.
The hatred, the cruelty that
Mm-hmm.
Black people experience on a day-to-day basis didn't go away. And we see snippets of that
Yeah.
every week
Right.
in the news.
Right.
Every week in the news. Just last week, the young man, I don't know if you saw that. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
In the mall, the two children in the mall, the two teenagers fighting in the mall, and the police response to them tussling in the mall was to attack the young Black
Right.
boy.
Right.
Right?
I did read on that. Yeah.
It was,
Yeah.
it
Mm-hmm.
was, for Black people, we already know this, but when we
Mm-hmm.
have those conversations in white spaces, and they seem to not even acknowledge or know
Mm-hmm.
about their own implicit bias or the implicit bias of other white people,
Yeah.
and we're frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, here's an example that is undeniable,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So, but that young man that was apprehended by the police, his name is the same name as my son. My son is Kai. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I saw it as a Black mother, that resonated.
Yeah.
It resonates every time you see a Black man, woman, or person
Mm-hmm.
attacked by the police or a random white mob in a neighborhood, or
Mm-hmm.
mall, or wherever. It's uncomfortable to see.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, when they called his name, when they called that young man's name,
Mm-hmm.
it was
Yeah.
that was a little, that was hard. That
Yeah.
was
Yeah. So you have essentially explained how
hard.
the disparities and the experiences of Black women, the racism that is manifest in these disparities, is ongoing, and from what was seen a century ago all the way to today. And you can look across all types of measures, from health to wealth, finances, to even the experiences of Black mothers, as you just broke down.
Mm,
These challenges, these atrocities of racism,
mm,
still harm our lives and harm our trajectories. And that's what you just pointed out. And I think it's important because so many times there are some who have the lens of, well, racism is over. Or that was, we had the civil rights movement. Now everyone's on a level playing field, so let's just move forward. But I think that's what is so critical about researchers like you that have done the work and are showing, no, this is still happening in 2022.
yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Well, Doc, can I just ask? Let me jump in real quick. Can you speak to, and this is the question, a question that came in, this is what I was going to ask, on the topic of institutionalization, what are specific policies that currently exhibit sexism and heterosexualism? Yeah, can you give us some examples of those policies? I'm interested to know what happened in Cincinnati, because I'm sure it's all over. And so
Mm,
we can just look out for.
mm. Well, yeah, I mean, so the primary policies that I'm looking at in my work focus on Jim Crow, and the ways that has permeated Black opportunities and Black people's lives, right? In terms of discrimination against sexual minorities, we can see it certainly at the individual level. And I'm certain there are still policies maybe around marriage, maybe around employers offering health insurance for same-sex couples. Like I remember this woman I interviewed who, in my economic mobility study, who talked a lot about her experience, queer woman, being partnered with a same-sex a relationship, and the types of discriminations that she experienced in the workplace, and with regards to health insurance, and housing can be another way that queer persons are discriminated against. And so, yeah, so I mean, there are ways that discrimination works both at the individual level in terms of what a particular person might do, and then there are ways that institutions might prohibit or deny people certain access or certain rights. And so, yeah, I don't know if that answers that question well or
I think you
not,
did. I
but
think you did. You gave some examples of policies, how different groups are discriminated against.
Or pronouns,
Yeah.
for example, that's another big issue, particularly for gender non-conforming individuals, being respected, to have their to be identified in the way that they choose to be identified, based on their understanding of their gender, right? And so there are all kinds of ways that it happens in a subtle way, but also in a more institutionalized way.
Okay. All right, thank you. So I want to ask, so just looking at what's going on in America right now, the role of women, what do you see the trajectory of the role of women in this current climate? What do you foresee coming for Black women, the trajectory for Black women?
I see Black women doing more organizing. Black women have always done that. And that's another thing in terms of like from history to from past to present. We have always stood up and spoke out publicly and organized on behalf of Black people, as on behalf of the community. And we're still doing that. I was just reading Carruthers' book, Unapologetic. Oh God, I'm gonna forget the total name. Uh, Unapologetically Black, Feminist, Queer. I can't remember the total name of the book. And she talks a lot about the organizing that she did in Chicago. And there's a lot of Black women and girls doing community organizing there. Or Patrice Concolor's book, When They Call You a Terrorist, one of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement, or the Me Too movement. There's so many ways that, or reproductive justice, Loretta Ross and many, many others, ways that Black women are responding to social injustice in our own individual lives, but in the lives of the Black community at large. And I see, I don't see us stopping. I see us continuing in that light, to advocate and organize and push for the dismantlement of these structures that continue to dehumanize us, degrade us, and just kill us prematurely. And so yeah, that's what I see. I see us still responding and pushing forward.
Would you say that has been the work of Black women just historically as they fought in this country?
Oh, absolutely. From Ella Baker, from Marie Stewart. Yeah, absolutely. Sojourner Truth. There Ida B. Wells. Oh, Ida B. Right? Yeah, of course. This is the legacy. It's such a beautiful legacy. As a Black woman, I feel so proud to stand on those shoulders. And so those women, known and unknown, who have worked tirelessly for our well-being, our collective well-being, is they're heroes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Dr. Norwood, you've got this, at least what I see, this juxtaposition of Black pain, Black female pain, and then Black female success in our world and in our society. You know, you have a Sandra Bland and the atrocity and the brutality with the snuffing out of her life. But then you have a Kamala Harris. Soon we're about to see, you know, likely in the next couple of weeks, the first Black female Supreme Court justice. But then again, we still have, like you said, on the individual levels and on the community level, you have these everyday experiences where Black people, Black women in particular, are experiencing struggle and pain. How do you reconcile either an optimism about the upward trajectory when you see kind of this split screen experience that Black women are having right now?
There's potential and possibility. And when we see that, and when we have access to you know, opportunities, we seize those opportunities. So it's interesting how you put that, Dr. Kinlock, because I immediately thought about this economic mobility study that I just finished in Cincinnati. And one of the things that was apparent in those data was that irrespective of the economic category, and there were three that seemed to kind of manifest out of these data. There was the upwardly mobile, there was the downwardly mobile, and there was the immobile, those who were stuck in place. Was that across, irrespective of those categories, there are a couple of things that stood out. One was the concept of strength and the strong Black woman, which is you know, good and bad, right? It's good that we recognize our resilience and our ability to be strong and stand up and do for others. But it's bad in the sense that it often means that we sacrifice so much for others that we leave ourselves behind, right? So it's taking care of the care. But the other thing were the experiences with gendered racism. So there's racism and then there's gendered racism, right? So the particular ways that gender did influence how racism manifests in the lives of a person who is read as female, who is Black female in this case, right?
Yeah.
So the ways that Black women are read are often what Pat Hill Collins calls controlling tropes. You know, whether it's the Jezebel, the welfare mom, all the ugly stereotypes. You know, I was reading something recently on sexual violence. There's a really great piece in the 1619 book written by Dorothy Roberts. Beautiful Dorothy Roberts. Dr. Dorothy Roberts wrote a chapter called Race, and she talks about the Celia Project, about this young Black girl during slavery who was purchased with the purpose of being a sex slave, right? And so this, you know, again, thinking about the particularities of the way that racism, in this case, slavery, how it worked or how it manifests in the lives of Black women was not only in terms of labor, but also in terms of their labor, in terms of reproduction, right? So in terms of the physical, but also the labor of reproducing a commodity, right? An individual, a person, a baby that would then be a commodity for a slave owner. And so, you know, the violence around the ways that we are mislabeled and mischaracterized is something else that was present in the lives of Black women, whether she was a Kamala Harris or whether she was a Sandra Bland, right? So irrespective of whatever status they might occupy, those things still were present. The expectation and cultivation of strength, but also the mislabeling, I call it ideological violence, the ideological violence that Black women experience. And that experience, it, you know, is outside our community and it's inside our community, right? And so, and it's damaging. it's damaging to if either of you have are raising a daughter, a little Black girl, then you will know that pain. You
Right.
will know, and she will know very early on how she is perceived by others as either ugly, sexually available, someone who can be talked to in a way that's degrading and dehumanizing. And it's painful to watch. It's painful to see and hear people, some people, not all people, some people internalize
Yeah.
those ugly stereotypes. And it's really hard to watch and
Yeah.
observe when we see people in our own community perpetuate it
Yeah.
and put it onto Black women.
Mm-hmm.
The same women who are always standing as pillars for the community, the first
Yeah.
ones out to defend us all,
That's
and
right.
the one that is then treated so badly in
Mm-hmm.
terms of being mislabeled and mischaracterized.
Yeah. Mislabeled. Thank you. Thank you. Well said. Mislabeled, mischaracterized, invisibilized. And we've talked about how these are the experiences of Black women on the everyday level, on the micro level,
Right.
but even in the academy,
Mm,
and even on the academic, on the intellectual level. Now, you and I were reading recently the Death of White Sociology. That was something that you
mm,
kind of dropped on me, Dr. Norwood. So I took my time to go through it, and I
mm,
was in awe and angry at the same time because
mm,
going through, all of this studying, this preparation, and these hidden figures and this hidden work, this hidden research that is not there. Certainly, we learned about E. Franklin Frazier, and his work as a chair of the Howard Department. Certainly, we learned about Du Bois and all of these other Black excellence in men. But
mm,
now we have Dr. Joyce Ladner, the author of that book, who is an intellectual giant of her own and is no shrinking flower to anybody. But her
mm.
work was never represented. And so
What?
yeah, right. Which is why I said it needs to be required reading for every student
Whoa!
in our department. So I'm taking my students through it now in my current course on social theory. But these are the ways that the intellectual contributions of Black women are also invisibilized. It's not that they're not doing it. It's not that
That's
they're there, but it's
right. That's right.
being ignored.
So you'll notice when I speak, I cite Black women as I talk. I do it. It's a practice, in
Mm-hmm.
part because I read a lot, and I want to pay, I want to acknowledge
Yeah.
the intellectual contributions of others.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people who I read are Black women, not exclusively. Of course, I read others, but as a Black feminist scholar, that's where I get a lot of my nurturing,
Mm-hmm.
nutrients, if you will,
Yeah. Yeah.
from the writings of Black women. When you mentioned how that book
Mm-hmm.
really impacts you, you know what I was
Mm-hmm.
thinking, and I don't know whose quote this is.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said, "The past is present."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I thought when when thinking about Latner's work,
Mm-hmm.
that book, The Death of White Sociology,
Mm-hmm.
is that we're having the same conversation in our department now about how we decolonize
Mm-hmm.
our curriculum.
That's right.
Just yesterday, Howard invited Ngugi wa Thiong'o,
Mm-hmm.
who is an African philosopher. He wrote a book called Decolonizing the Mind. And I remember reaching out to him about 3-4 years ago. I asked him if I purchased one of his, it was a particular book, if he would sign it and send it back to me. So I purchased it, sent it to him, and he signed it and sent it back to me.
Mm-hmm.
I cited him in my paper, which was about my process of going natural. And for me, it really was, it felt like I was decolonizing both my mind and my body
Mm-hmm.
and allowing my natural hair to just come out,
Yeah.
be seen, right? To be seen,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
um, and maybe heard. I don't
That's
know what,
right.
but definitely visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's the so Ladner's work, in terms of decolonization, linking that, between the two, the hair, the body, the mind, is, as an academic, we are also being pressed. And I think this is especially true at an HBCU, a prominent, prestigious HBCU like Howard, to decolonize our curriculums. Why? It's a great question. Why are we centering white social thought
That's right.
in a department who are raising a new generation of PhDs that will likely be focused on Black communities?
That's right.
Why aren't we reading Black sociologists?
Absolutely.
I mean, as a Black feminist, I would never think, oh, let me read a bunch of white feminists
right
work to understand Black women's lives. That don't make any sense.
Right.
It's just like,
but this is what we've been doing. That's right.
And so,
right.
I mean, I recognize that I have limits as a department chair in terms of power, but saying we're going to do this, that, and the other, that it will take the collective to agree that this is necessary, that we really need to rethink about what we're teaching, particularly in classes
and how we're teaching it.
Just all the classes we're teaching. Why don't our students know who Mario Smalls is, or who or they may know Wilson's work, but or Lawrence Bobo. I don't know. Just Nikki Jones.
That's right. That's right.
Why don't we know
Manning Marable? Yeah, we can go down the list. Right.
Anderson, who just wrote a book called Blacks in White Spaces. Almost bought it. We'll go back to buy it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we should be reading work done by Black social thinkers and scholars to understand Black people's lives and Black communities.
That's it. You're about to get me on my soapbox, because that's all I do.
In our social
theory class, that's all I've been doing, is just reorganizing the curricula around Black social theorists. And we hit Marx, and we hit Durkheim, and we hit the others, but we want to make sure that we're centering. And I brought in Black women to ensure that we are not losing their contribution.
Right. Make sure you get the Black queer women in there too, so we have all those perspectives.
So Dr. Norwood, I think you and I are nerding out right now. Pastor,
wait, Doc, can I jump in?
He's trying to pull us back to the center. Pastor, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to say, well, you said something that really struck a chord. Just decolonizing the curriculum at an HBCU, like that right there. That's just like in 2022. That's amazing. But that's on every level. As a pastor, Pastor Kenline, Dr. Kenline, pastor as well, we need to decolonize the way we look at the Bible, just everything.
Right.
That has been my whole thing for a while now. We need to look at it not through whiteness, but through the Black experience. We know Dr. James Cone, he pushed that, the father of Black liberation theology. He's been saying that. So just thank you for that. Was just a reminder. But I do have two questions that came in the chat. All right. We'll take, all right. This is the first question. It says here, can you see that, Doc?
Oh, no.
All right, I'll read it to you. It says, how do Black men hurt the mobilization and progression of Black women, and what can we do to help mitigate the challenges that Black women face in all facets of life?
Great question. Good question, Sheila.
That's hard. So if I speak straight and I speak honestly, I would start with the way that we're sometimes mischaracterized by some Black men. So I'm not making generalizations about all Black men, but there are certainly those in our community that often mischaracterize and mislabel Black women. And when you do that, you rob persons of their humanity, which makes it easier to violate them. And so whether that violation is physical or sexual or in some other way, it could be emotional, like, abandonment or the threat of abandonment. or the withdrawal of whatever, love or care or whatever. And so, I see men as nurturing beings. I think, oftentimes, the way we raise our boys and our men to think that they need to dominate others in their lives, whether it is their wives or their children or whomever, is a kind of it's not kind of, it's a problematic way of approaching any relationship with any person. Personally, I can't be in a relationship with anybody who thinks they need to dominate me. I can't.
That's right.
A man, a woman,
Right.
a person, it doesn't work, right? So I think if you're in any relationship with any person, you need to respect their total being, and understand that you're not there to dominate them in any way, whether it's physical or emotionally. No way. That's already an unhealthy approach to a relationship to begin with.
Yeah.
So just recognizing the way that we, gender, our understanding of gender and maleness can be toxic, can be damaging, not only to the women and other persons in their lives, but it's also damaging to them. And so I think it would start there. It starts with respect, starts with acknowledging that you're not there to control or dominate anybody.
That's right.
And that you're there to be a partner, a friend, a kind person, a human, fully human person, in relation with, others.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Thank you, Dr. Norwood. You answered it well. And I think that we really, and you answered it in some ways, I think a little politely, because this is kind of a hidden secret, or not talked about in the Black community, and certainly not in the Black church. And that is the violence, sexual violence against Black women, Black girls, and physical violence in our community and in our church. The numbers are huge. They're large. Pastor, you pastored now for a good while in your churches, and I certainly have as well. And I was shocked over the years when I finally realized, because you are kind of like one of those first trusted persons that members and others, community persons, come to with the pain and with the violation, and then you've got to deal with it. The percentages are high.
they're huge.
They're very high in our community. You know that on the academic side, Dr. Norwood. And so when we look at what can Black men do, it is predominantly, we're talking about violations that are coming at the hands of Black men and Black boys. And so when we talk about this toxic masculinity and abandoning these notions of domination and it's got to be my way or the highway, and almost feeling like I have to control or dominate someone. We just buried one of my members' nieces about 3 months ago because of a domestic violence situation against a boyfriend that she left, that she wasn't even with, an ex-boyfriend, I should say. But then he decided that he was going to take things into his own hands and trailed her to her job early one morning and took her life right here in DC. Very painful, beautiful Black woman, whole future ahead of her, doing the right thing, doing right work. These are the realities. And these are the oppressions, the within group oppressions and pain that our Black women are experiencing, that we as Black men have got to take the ownership for and recognize that we are here, not in a patriarchal way to protect, but we are here to protect our Black women. We must be sure that we are not making any space for violence to be justified against our Black women and our Black girls. It's large, it's huge, and if anything, we need to talk about this more, do sessions on this, and push this so that we are not having these experiences amongst our Black women.
Thank you for that acknowledgement. I can tell you, I too was shocked. I had no idea how prolific sexual violence is for Black women. And when I started my research, I often say I didn't go looking for violence, but violence was everywhere. And I mean, it's different kinds of violence, but one type of violence, sexual violence, just reared its ugly head over and over and over and over again. And for many women, it's not something that happens once, but it's something that often happens more than once. I've interviewed people that were molested at young ages, like as young as 2, 6, 9. And it's often people within their families.
That's right.
And then there's also people in the community. These old dudes on the corner trying to pick up young girls as they're walking home from school. Black women are most likely of any group in this country to be sexually trafficked. I've interviewed women, shockingly, who had that experience. DC, in fact, is a huge area where this is a huge problem. Atlanta, Houston, or other areas. And so, yeah, it's something we don't talk about. Black women often, in many of the interviews that I've done, this is the first time they're talking about it with someone. You know, oftentimes it doesn't even go report it. They're afraid to report it, especially if it's a relative or someone that they know in the family. And because of the ways that we've been mischaracterized as a liar, someone that can't be trusted, and this is true for any woman, many women, irrespective of race, who experience sexual assault, is that they're not believed. They have to prove that they were actually assaulted. And so, the silence around it is also a problem. And so I'm happy to hear that there are people in your churches that are coming to you and talking about it. That is also that's interesting for a number of reasons, and it happens in the church.
It happens, absolutely.
I remember that interview that she was a young girl, and it happened to her.
Absolutely.
And so yeah.
The percentages are large. They're 30+%. And that was just kind of my anecdotal, just over my 20 years of pastoring, and all the Black women, all the Black teen girls, et cetera, that have opened up and confided and shared that pain, that they have had those traumatic experiences. And so this is real. I am a husband to a beautiful Black woman. I've got 2 beautiful Black girls, and a mother who I adore as well. And so it's very personal for me. And as I've seen this pain, it's something that I realize that as Black men in particular, since the question was about Black men, we've got a job not to be silent on this and to acknowledge where we are culpable, and very much culpable. Again, this is not external society. This is us now, and we've got to do something to protect our Black women. Let me ask you.
Let me jump in. Just want to say, just talking to the Christian church, just the spirit of domination, period, on any level, is not of God. Any level, from in a leadership role, a husband and wife, dad, son. None of that. That is not of God. You don't see that in the character of Jesus at all. The spirit of domination. So that spirit, period, is not of God. So just want to be clear on that. And also, Doc, before Dr. Kenlock, before you get to your next question, I do have a question for Dr. Norwood, real quick, that came in. Let me put it up here. It says, "What book would you say is your most recommended for girls ages 12 to 15?
Oh, it's not on my desk. I moved it. Feminism is for Everyone by Bell Hooks. In fact, I just did a talk.
Bell Hooks.
Bell Hooks. Feminism is for everybody. And she wrote it with the intent of making that book accessible to anybody, irrespective of literacy level, right? She didn't write it in this kind of academic vernacular, but in a way that is reachable to a large audience, and for people who don't know a lot about what feminism is. Oh gosh, Bell Hooks, Feminism is for Everybody. I would definitely recommend and start with that book for any person. And in fact, she has a beautiful chapter on violence. And so, yeah.
And Thank you, Dr. Norwood. Let me ask you this: what do you want Black women to know about themselves, and then what do you want Black men to understand about Black women?
Mm. I think it's important that Black women always celebrate their strength and their beauty. But in celebrating their strength, they need to also recognize their fragilities. And that's not something we often talk about in our communities, is the fragility part. Because we have to be strong all the time, every day, all day, for so many people. But behind the scenes, many Black women are breaking and breaking down.
That's right.
We just witnessed Chesley Chris suicide a few weeks ago, where she jumped from her New York apartment building. Beautiful young Black woman who committed suicide. And I remember giving a talk about a week later. And what I thought was interesting about that was two things. One, we don't talk about suicide and mental health enough in Black communities, although there's more talk about it now. But suicide is actually the sixth and eighth leading cause of death for Black women ages 1 to 19 and 20 to 44 years. And most people don't know that. And it's, I think, because too often we're talking about our resilience and our strength to withstand, but we're not talking about all the premature Black death that's happening to Black women, whether it's by suicide, by high blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, breast cancer, etc. But we are dying and en masse prematurely. And a lot of that deals is related to the everyday stress that we experience that's not being treated. So it's important that we acknowledge that fragility. And thinking about the past as present, it's funny because I went home a couple of weeks ago to get some more books because I'm now writing my own book and I needed more of my stuff here with me. And I grabbed this one book. It's called Cincinnati's Black People by Lyle Kohler, it was his master's thesis. Anyway, he collected every newsprint report and other organizational reports that deals with Black people from like 1787 to like 1980 something. And he was a white dude. It's a meticulous piece of work. Anyway, he has a citation in there from, I think it was 1929 to like 1935, and it was about Blacks and suicide. And I remember reading it when I first, put that thing together, because I made PDFs of it since it was a master's thesis. It's not a bounded book where I could check it out. Anyway, so I went back and I read it. It was out there. Chesley had passed. And funny enough, he said in that book in the 1930s that there was a high rate of attempted suicide among Black women. It was higher than any other social category. And I remember going to pull the suicide numbers in Cincinnati for current, and it turns out that white men, then white women, then Black men, then Black women were likely to have, that was the kind of hierarchical order of suicides in Cincinnati. Then I went back to Kohler and I read it again, and I realized he talked about suicide attempts, right? So suicide attempts, if you're looking at statistics, suicides are those that have been completed, right? That have been successful. But then there is a lot of attempts that are happening in the background that are not necessarily cataloged in those statistics. And so I know from my work in Cincinnati that there's a lot of depression among Black women. But because we're, given this public facade of being strong and having it together and doing this, that, and the other, we don't often see or know that people are suffering. Right. So recognizing that fragility. The other thing that was in Kohler's write-up was that among Black women who did commit suicide, they were more likely to jump from high places. And I had goosebumps because that's exactly what Chesley Christ did.
Wow.
And, almost 100 years later.
Mm-hmm.
And so recognizing those fragilities. I'm sorry, Dr. Kinlock, you said, I can't remember the other part of that.
Yeah. The second one was just, what do you want Black men to know about Black women?
I think Black women need to be reminded how beautiful they are physically. And I that may seem counter.
Very interesting.
But
that's good. That's good. Talk about it, though.
I mean, the way that we have been demonized and held to this white standard, which is very inconsistent with our features.
Come on.
I just think it's important because that was one of the things that came out of my reproductive justice study, with so many Black women, especially those of us who are on the darker hue, feeling very unattractive, being told that they're ugly because they're Black, or because they have curly hair or really tightly curly hair, or whatever the case might be, or certain features. And so for heterosexual women who want to and enjoy being validated to some extent by Black men, not that you only have to be validated by men, you can be validated by many others, but for those of us who are attracted to men, that that's nice to know and nice to hear. Not the only thing that should be high, but it's one of those things that I don't know that Black women hear enough. And
that
so
their Black features are beautiful.
That, come on, say again.
I said that their Black features are beautiful.
Yes, and they are. They're so beautiful, so beautiful. It's not lip service. I mean, when I see, I'm at Howard now, and I see young, beautiful people, right? Males and females, just gorgeous. And I can remember back in the day when I was young, and people would, say this and that, and I would think, oh, you don't see it, but when you get older, like where I am now, again, I was born in the 70s. You can see how beautiful, how absolutely beautiful our babies are.
That's right.
They're beautiful. They're just so beautiful. And so, that's important. I mean, there are many other things, but that I can pick up, and maybe talking about Black women and beauty, and was maybe not the best thing, but it's one of those things that I do think is important.
That was on point. Yeah.
For especially for our young Black girls to know that, that they're seen as beautiful.
Yeah. And Doc, I just want to follow up with that. I have had some church members, a family, one of my congregations, I won't say which one, but the colorism thing you mentioned with the dark-skinned girl, just the youngest daughter, one of the daughters, the youngest daughter is of darker complexion than her other siblings. Yes. And so as a pastor in the family, we're trying our best to build her up, because she thinks that, why am I? Is there something wrong with me? Am I ugly? And we're trying to build up. And that's to hear you say that, it's just a reminder how important that is to let our girls know how beautiful they are. No matter what the white society, have said, we have to decolonize, like I said, even our kids. So thank you for that.
Or again, what Black men might say, right? The one who, go chasing the white light. And it's not to say that, we have to appreciate all the beauties across the spectrum that is a part of us. But when you do see that over and again for young Black girls with, Afro features, that also sends a message about, what beauty is prioritized, what beauty is seen as more desirable. And so,
Dr. Norwood, this has been an in-depth conversation, and I want to go deeper. And maybe we're going to have to bring you back so that you can kind of take us through some more of that, because your answer threw me off. Did it throw you off, Pastor?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. But as I hear you say it, it is absolutely true, and I'm glad that you shared that and that you spoke to that. So you are in the midst of a book. You are just about finished with your book, Jim Crow Geographies: Mapping the Intersection of Gender, Race, and Sexuality in Urban Space. Can you tell us a little bit about your book? Give us just a little sneak preview.
Yeah, so the book is a combination of all the 3 studies that I've mentioned that I've done in Cincinnati. I've done now over 90 in-depth interviews across those 3 studies. The first one, again, focus on HIV. The second one focus on reproductive justice. And this third one on economic mobility, all focus on Black self-identified women. And so the book, I think the major intervention in the book is a concept that I'm introducing called spatial violence. And so I look at what is called structural violence and direct violence, structural violence being policy and direct violence being what happens to the body. But what I heard in my interviews was that there was a lot of spatial violence, the violence that's happening around us, right? So there's violence through policy, there's violence that happens in the policy that directly has an impact on what happens to the body and the mind.
Right.
There's also violence that's happening around us, right? So within the neighborhoods that we navigate on a daily basis. But spatial violence has been a part of Black people's history since our inception in this country. We arrived in these, on slave ships, which are spatial containers, and once from slave ships to plantations to ghettos to prisons. So this is a form of spatial violence. In terms, and one of the dimensions of spatial violence is the containment of persons, right? And so within these containers, we're often surveilled. We're being watched, whether it's on a plantation, in the ghetto, or in a prison. And so there's the surveillance. There is the threat of expulsion, right? So whether it's in a school, for example, we know that Black girls are more likely to be expelled from school than any other group. And then there's a flat out execution. All right. So Black people in space, like we think about Ahmaud Arbery jogging in a space where whites didn't think he belonged and thought of him as a threat. And so when that happens, sometimes we find ourselves executed either by white mobs, or we are executed by police officers and in other ways. And so I think one of the interventions, or one of the contributions of that work, is this concept around the spatial violence.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Norwood. Dr. Carolette Norwood, department chair, professor and department chair of the Department of Sociology and Criminology at the esteemed Howard University. Black female excellence right here, everybody. Topping off our Black History Month. We want to thank you so much, Dr. Norwood. This was a very insightful and engaging conversation that we had with you, and we're going to have to bring you back so that you can go a little bit deeper on some of what we talked about today. Black women rising, where we are, where we've been, and where we're going. I hope that you all have enjoyed the conversation that we've had today, and continue to stay tuned with us as we continue to have these very candid conversations on race and other matters. Pastor Tyler?
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Norwood. Definitely appreciate your time and just being with us, just sharing. I know we could definitely go deeper. We'll be here all day, but just thank you so much. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Color Conversations. We will be here next week. We have another special guest, so do not miss Color Conversation at 12 o'clock at Metropolitan Seventh-day Adventist YouTube or Facebook page, or Keenan Tyler YouTube or Facebook page. Check the podcast out anywhere you can find a podcast. So make sure you go ahead and tune in and share this. If you've been blessed by this, make sure you go ahead and share this with your friends and your family. So actually, Dr. Kenlock Max, that you just close us out with a word of prayer.
Absolutely. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we want to thank you, oh God, for the opportunity to come together to discuss serious matters and serious issues that impact our lives and impact our people. We thank you for this moment to be able to uplift the experiences of our Black women. And we thank you, Lord, that throughout all of the challenges, all of the pain, all the difficulty, they're still rising. And that is clearly only because of your outstretched hand and your care and your covering upon all of our sisters. We ask now, dear God, for your blessing. Keep all of those who have watched. May their minds be enlightened, and may we be challenged to do our part to make sure that we are recognizing the greatness that you have placed in our Black women, and that we're elevating it and protecting it. We give you thanks. Bless Dr. Norwood. We thank you, God, that she came and shared her time with us today. We give you thanks now in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. God bless everyone, and see you next week.